Share screen, press play. There we are. All right. Well, thanks for joining us today, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about the do's and the don'ts with buyers. Of course, always remember to reach out to Deb or myself. We're happy to help you and go over this with you. Or if you see it once and you want to see it again, we'll send it to you again. But here we go. We'll jump right into it. Go ahead, Deb.
This is really pertaining to all of the new laws and everything that or rules that we have been told that we have to do now. And so the National Association of Realtors put out do's and don'ts for buyers and for sellers. So that's what we're going to talk about for the next couple weeks. Try and give you a little bit more clarity on what you're supposed to be doing and what we're not allowed to do, what they're going to be looking at when they do our audits and such. So this is for buyers this week. So clearly and frequently demonstrate your value, which is something that we've always been telling you to do. Make sure you're communicating with your buyers about why they need to have a real estate agent help support them. And you can use your documents with Moxie. Present the buyer's guide, and Tony has a version of it on Homestar Office as well for a buyer's presentation. Those are two really good resources for you to help you explain yourself to a buyer. Don't you agree?
Oh, exactly. I mean, if most agents don't have a written list of what your value is and the things you do for a buyer, you do a lot, but a lot of agents, if I ask them, well, name all the things you could do, it's kind of, you get like deer in the headlights, show houses, write contract, you know, and you make it to like five or six things, but there's dozens and dozens and dozens of things. So remember, go on Homestar Office, look for the list, of things that you do for agents, or Deborah, I can send that to you too.
Yep. Or Julia or Carly too. They all know where it is and they all know how to get it to you. Okay.
Awesome. Next.
Explain what a written buyer agreement is and why the buyer is being asked to sign it. So these are the words directly from NAR. This is an agreement outlining the services the agent will provide and what they will be paid for their services. Very important that you need to note that. Explain that the purpose is to ensure buyers are directly involved in the negotiations of the amount their broker is being paid. Obtaining this agreement is a requirement that most MLSs put in place and is now a law in Ohio. Be clear that you must have an agreement in place before touring a home with the buyer, and they should only sign an agreement with the buyer and that the buyer and the agent are comfortable with. So one of the things that I'm pointing out to you is it's talking about how much money the broker is going to be paid. Oh, so many we are still seeing coming through the office that have zero on that
Right.
amount. So make sure you're putting the most amount that you want to be paid. You can get into logistics and stuff like that with Tony specifically or with I. We'd be happy to talk to you about it. We're not talking about that stuff today. We're just going over why we have to do what we have to do. Okay.
One thing without going into detail on this is that this buyer agreement, this I've been telling agents, this buyer agreement is for the buyer. It benefits the buyer. If you don't understand it or don't think that or can't clearly, the buyer is not there to protect you as an agent, it's to protect the buyer and you and so if you anytime you have a contract you need someone to sign, buyer or seller or whatever, you have to at least know firsthand when you sell anybody anything why it benefits them. So many agents think that the buyer agreement is to benefit them and to protect their commission. Yeah, that's one of it, but it also protects the buyer from overpaying commissions, or you and the buyer just now. I know, Debbie, we don't want to go into too much deal, but this just wanted, while we're talking about this, is just make sure you understand to the buyer why it benefits them. Number one thing, you and the buyer have a conversation of how much you get paid and from who, and that what benefits them. Because if not, the buyer has no control. So this helps the buyer gain control of how much you get paid. So,
Absolutely perfect. Yep.
yeah.
And you got to have an amount on there, guys. You got to
Yeah.
have an amount on there. You can't have zero. Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. Reach out to any of us. We'll be happy to go over it.
Yep. Before signing the buyer agreement, be transparent about the realities of the compensation and the potential costs. Inform the buyer that they can request compensation for their agent from the seller or the seller's agent. Not all sellers or seller's agent may choose to pay the buyer broker compensation. Ensure the buyer understands their responsibility for any agreed upon compensation. Inform the buyer that under the current FHA rules, agent compensation cannot be financed through the mortgage. This is not seller concessions, you guys. Don't get the two mixed up. I've had several people ask me, do we put it in that line where it says seller closing costs? No, this is not closing costs. Compensation, buyer broker commission, listing agent commission is separate. That is not the same. And you gotta, if you want more clarity about how it affects the loans and stuff, Kelly's got a great video on it. Hush has a great video on it. I think Mike has a great video on it. We've all done so much preparation to try and help you guys figure this stuff out. Talk to a lender. If you don't want to talk to Hush or Kelly because you don't know them and you know a different lender, ask them. They're going to tell you because they need to make sure that you do this correctly so it doesn't affect the loan, correct?
Right. Yep, exactly. And exactly what you said. There's so many different ways you could earn the commission from the buyer, from the seller, from the company, from a third party. But that again, back to what I said the last slide, is that it protects the buyer. The buyer in our buyer agreement says a buyer's not forced to buy a house unless your compensation is paid by whatever they feel comfortable paying. They're not ever stuck. So that's one of the things that we've gotten, over with some agents get explained to buyers. Some buyers were concerned or scared that if they sign that buyer agreement, they're going to be stuck paying the agent. That's not true. There's no way to be stuck paying the agent unless they want to. There's no way they're going to get into a purchase agreement, finalize it, and not know if they're going to pay or not pay. So again, contact us and we'll go over that more in detail. So next slide.
Ensure the buyer understands all options and advocate for the terms of the offer for your buyer needs. Realtors have an ethical and fiduciary duty to serve the best interest of their clients. The settlement explicitly preserves offers of compensation as a choice for consumers because it can mutually benefit buyers and sellers. You can inquire about the existence of such offers and communicate the response to your buyers. So that's asking your listing agent, is the seller offering anything towards me, right?
Mhm.
Additionally, even if the seller or their broker is not offering compensation, your buyer can choose to ask the seller to cover the buyer broker cost in the buyer's offer. That's what we're saying. We're not saying that this buyer absolutely has to pay this because sellers are still paying compensation, you guys. Even with the new rules and everything that we have going on and the changes with our exclusive rights, which we'll get into a little bit when we talk about sellers, but nowhere does it say that they absolutely positively 100% don't have to pay a buyer's agent. It doesn't say that anywhere. It's
Right.
just giving everybody a choice to negotiate these things. Okay, but you
Yeah.
got to have a baseline, and your baseline is how much you want to make per transaction, and that's what you're putting on your buyer's agency agreement.
Correct, correct. And still going back to that, another benefit for the buyer, just like your fiduciary responsibility, is that when a buyer signs that agreement and you both sign that buyer's agreement, now that make sure you have the fiduciary responsibility to show them any house or any property they want. Another benefit to buyer, when me and you sit down and sign this, I show you anything. It doesn't matter where it is or what it is. I'm going to, but basically explain it doesn't matter if a seller's paying commission, not going to pay commission, doesn't matter if it's a for sale by owner, doesn't matter. Whatever it is, I have a fiduciary responsibility to show you any property because we already have this agreement in place that protects the buyer. So,
Yep.
all right, next slide, right?
Yep.
Okay.
There, that's what it's talking about right there. Don't misrepresent anything to a buyer, including the nature and purpose of the written buyer agreement. God, this slide came out awful dark, didn't it? Sorry about that, you
No,
guys.
no, it comes out good. That's right.
Buyer agreements outline the services the agent will provide and what they will be paid for those services. The purpose and reason for these agreements must be accurately explained and presented to the consumer that they can make an informed decision on how to proceed. Don't forget, we have code of ethics that we have to fall back on, and there's a couple articles there that they list to always protect and promote the interests of their client and to treat all parties honestly, and that all agreements related to real estate transaction be clear and understandable. I know it's scary when they're like, oh, but I don't know how to explain this stuff to them. Just tell them, look, I'm bound by ethics. I have to do what's best for you. You know, a
Correct.
lot of people don't realize all of the stuff that we go through when we get our license and that we have to continually take classes and learn things so that we are protecting them all the time. Don't attempt to do the workaround, the practice, the practice to change the requirements. This is really important. They did add this in here, so I am going to read it to you. When you agree with a buyer to certain work for a particular amount of compensation, you must do so in good faith. Any compensation agreed to in the written buyer agreement must be objectively ascertainable under the settlement. That means compensation must be clearly defined. If it's zero, right? If you're doing a flat
Exactly.
fee, you can do a flat fee. You can do a percentage. We don't really do hourly rates here, but in some places they do. And not be open-ended. Do not enter into the agreements created to get around this requirement. For example, you should not enter into multiple agreements with the buyer at one time for same services or define compensation as to whatever the seller or the seller agent is offering as compensation. You should not amend the agreement for the sole purpose of matching an offer of compensation that is greater than what you and your buyer agreed to. So if you put zero, thinking the seller is going to offer you two and you're going to take that, this is what they're talking about.
Mhm, mhm.
Be honest about it in the beginning, right? Any amendment must have a legal basis and fully informed buyer uh, and a fully informed buyer that agrees to amend. Consult the state contract law. Remember that written buyer agreement is a legal binding document that commits you to the buyer. So they have had a few questions about the things, and that's why they put all this stuff out there so you guys could read it. But really, this is the most important thing that I'm trying to get across to you. Don't say, okay, Mr. Buyer, I'm going to not charge you anything. I'm going to go directly to the seller. So you put zero on there. Don't do that. This is what I charge, Mr. Buyer. I charge X amount of dollars to perform a transaction for you and make sure that everything happens accordingly. We are going to ask the seller to pay for it, of course, but I have to declare this to you so that you know how much money I want to be paid during the transaction, right?
Exactly. And one of the things that, agents are starting to get used to is that the first reaction or first thought they have about having a buyer agreement is that one, they have to have it for 3 months, 5 months, 6 months, and they have to have a fixed amount on the buyer agreement. What you do, you have, put what the maximum amount of money you're going to earn or you and the buyer agree to. What I mean by that, specifically, example, if a buyer called you today and said, I just want to see that house, that $1 million house, and that's the only house you're going to show me, and the buyer's an educated professional buyer that's bought and sold many properties and understands how it works. I said, hey, I just having you show me that house, and if I buy that house, you and the buyer agree to how much compensation you're going to get and who's going to pay you. Example, I'm not throwing this out, I'm just throwing out numbers. Example, because some agents are always, they're stuck on like a 3% or a 2% or a 4%. No, that can vary, not in the same contract though. So some agents, like I had an agent, that exact example, this buyer wanted to show you one house and they agree to 1%. If you see that house and agree to that house, and they both agreed 1%, but then they didn't like that house and wanted them to show other houses. Now they moved it to 3%. And because now it's a new agreement, it's over a longer period of time. So your percentages can change as long as it's on different, say one expires. Another example, and not to keep on going on, but we could go over this one-on-one, is if like an example of agents ask me, well, what advantage does I could tell a buyer to sign on for me for 6 months financially, not all the services you're going to do, but hey, I can't change my fee without you agreeing to it over 6 months. But if you only do a month with me and want to go on with me the next month and sign a new contract, we could, then it's open to
Yeah.
what you do. So imagine you have a buyer and you agree to X amount for a month and they run you around and show you 50 houses, and every weekend they want you all day Saturday, all day Sunday, every weekend. And the next month you go, if I'm going to work that hard, we're increasing it to this. You have freedom. They have freedom. It's renegotiated because the contract expired. So there's different ways to explain to buyers the different contracts, individual properties, that and it's like that last sentence or two can be amended as long as you and the buyer agree and to amend it.
Right. Right.
All right. Next.
Yep. Don't accept more compensation than what is provided for in the agreement with your buyer. This is right from NAR's mouth. Under the NAR proposed settlement, buyer brokers cannot receive compensation for brokerage services for any source that exceeds the amount or rate in the agreement with the buyer. Do not accept bonuses or other compensation from a seller or other source that is more than what is in your buyer agreement. Again, that goes back to what we were talking about before. Don't share your signed buyer agreement with competitors unless required by state law. This is really important, and we're going to get into this when we talk about sellers too. This is the same as an exclusive right to sell. It's your exclusive buyer's agency agreement. It's between you, the buyer, and us. No one else. Okay. If you're not with our brokerage, it's between you, the buyer, and your broker, not with us, right? So this is private. You do not send this to the listing agent or the seller. They have no right to ask for it. Okay.
Exactly.
Written buyer agreements contain your compensation and other confidential information that may be material to the transaction and critical to the success of negotiation on behalf of the buyer. The MLS has an auditing program for compliance. You must comply with these requests. So we're talking about MLS, the title, or the lender may ask for those agreements, and that's okay because we're allowed to give them to those people, but that's it. You don't share it with anybody else. Okay, it's private.
Yep.
Do not limit properties you show a buyer or steer clients away from properties based on offers of compensation. This is really important, and I know that our agents don't do it, right? Because we're all good people, but make sure that you're not trying to find out what the compensation is before you show the home. Under NAR's Code of Ethics and MLS policy, steering buyers based on the amount of buyer broker compensation is prohibited. Realtors must inform buyers about a home available that meets their criteria, regardless of whether or how much the seller or the listing agent is offering compensation. A buyer should be in the driver's seat with the respect to their search and the homes they wish to pursue. Agents should educate buyers on the pros and cons of each option available when looking at and making an offer on the property, including that the buyers can ask the sellers to pay for the buyer broker compensation as part of the offer, which is kind of what Tony was saying, even if there is no other offer of compensation. Refusing to inform your client of properties because they are being sold by a broker, agent, or seller who's not offering compensation is inconsistent with the principles. And I got the little judge there because you will get in trouble. So do not do that.
Yeah, it's very simple. Well, let me just break it back, and I was compared to closing costs. So many times I've had over the years have buyers that need closing costs and we still show them houses. We didn't call all the listings up before we showed them and said, do you need will your seller pay closing costs? You just showed the property and you asked for closing costs and negotiated in. Sometimes you would have a seller said, no, I'm not paying closing costs. And then the buyer would have to decide to either walk away or pay the closing costs themselves. Same thing with this. You show them any property they want to see. It doesn't matter if their seller says they're going to pay or not pay. It's good. The buyer gets to put it in their offer. A seller can't stop a buyer from asking, just like a seller can't stop a buyer from asking for closing costs in an offer. A seller can't stop a buyer from asking, "Hey, fix these things," or paint the house purple. They can't stop that, but they could. The deal might not go through. The seller says, "No, I'm not doing that." Buyer says, "I need it," and they can't come to agreement. Then the deal doesn't happen. So buyers can ask for anything in the offer. And I've always done this before this change. I've always told our agents when a buyer says, "Well, they have to, it has to be move-in ready. They need closing costs." And then I have sellers that say they won't pay this, they won't pay that, all of that, but submit it in an offer, put it in writing, and let's see what they say. And if they say no and they say cross it out, then buyer walks away. But so many times I've had that they do that and sellers change their mind because their house may have been sitting or the offer was high enough or whatever reason. So it hurts your buyers to just assume, even if the listing agent says it. If the listing agent says, "Don't do this, don't do that," no problem. Your fiduciary responsibility is to write up the offer for your buyer and try and see what happens after that. So hopefully that made sense. So,
Absolutely. That was perfect. And I couldn't have said it any better. I hope that helps you guys give some clarity on what we're talking about there, because it's not as scary as people think. We're still doing things the same way we did it before. We just have one little extra step that we have to, or two, one and before, and then the buyer broker compensation agreement. But still, I mean, it's been, where are we in? We're in November now. So it's been a few months already. They're still doing it. They're still paying the fees, you guys. So quit being so
right,
scared about it.
right. It's
Buy
all, everything's
sellers are
negotiable.
offering, yeah, they're paying fees. They're paying the commission. They're paying the closing costs. On appraisals, I still see them offering closing costs almost on every single one now. So don't be afraid to ask for what your buyer needs. All they can do is say
Oh,
no, and then you can leave if they don't like it. But most of the time, they're not going to say no.
also, and whatever seller or listing agent tells you before an offer is signed about commission or what the seller's offering is not guaranteed. Because I've had a few buyers, well, the seller's agent said this. I submitted the offer and they didn't do that. It's just a verbal. There's no guarantee until it's on the contract, till it's signed by the buyer and seller, what your compensation and who's paying it. Because before we had it in the MLS, we had what we're supposed to, as realtors, when we had it on the MLS, is that we had to, or the listing company is supposed to guarantee when an offer is accepted that the buyer's agent will get compensated. That is gone.
Yeah.
So even everything is verbal. So on that, so because everything is all compensation is negotiable, and until everything is signed on that purchase agreement. So
That's why you're using the buyer broker compensation agreement, because everyone signs it. The seller signs it, the buyer sign it, the listing agent signs it, the buyer's agent signed it. It's in black and white. No one can dispute it then. It's right there. Okay.
exactly.
All
All
right,
right.
so my funny for today is going to be I've got insider information on the market. Contact me today. You can post that on social. You can make little cider packets or little drinks or whatever and give them away as for pop buys and stuff. I thought this was really cute for the
Yes.
season that we're in. You can always, like I said, find a ton of these things on Etsy. That's where I find them all the time, and you can buy them for virtually no money. Like it's cheap to buy those little things from Etsy. Um, and then they send them right to you, and then you don't have to worry about it. They put your information on there and it's done. Or sometimes they give you the template and then you have it on your computer and you fill in your contact information and stuff. But they're really, really inexpensive to make the tags on Etsy. They have them already made. All you got to do is look them up. So,
Looks good. And we got some CE coming, like
yep.
always.
Yeah. This week we have the stuff about the point of sale inspections in Cleveland. That's with ACAR. That should be a goodie, but I don't know what they're going to be talking about there. That should be very interesting. Mike Ferrante's doing core law on Saturday. I'll be at that one. Top secrets of working with buyers is going to be Mike Ferrante on December 4th, and on December 5th, Hush has core ethics. And then we get into the holidays, and then we can start our next year, right? So
Exactly. And that's all we got. So stop
yeah, that's
sharing.
it.
There we are.
We're
Well, thanks for
winding
joining
it
us
down.
today, everyone. And remember when if you're today is November 12th, 2024. But if you're watching this video anytime in the future, reach out to Debbie or myself. We're happy to go over this. And if they're watching this in the way future, because we sent it to you, it's on our website, reach out to us to make sure there's no new updates. You never know. There might be a new update. You might be watching this, might be something new that NAR or lawsuit changed a year from now or 2 years from now. Hopefully everything's died down a little bit and it's where it's going to be for a long time without any major changes. But always check because a lot of agents might have just a handful of sales every once in a while, might do well 1 year and take a break the next year. So if you're not one of those agents that are selling every year or every month or often or watching all of our emails for updates, make sure before you get into a buyer contract or listing agreement, just check with the office anything new on anything, and we'll keep you updated on that. So that's it. Well, thanks for joining us, and have a great week.
Bye bye, everybody.